My car made a sound it had never made before, a small metallic click, right as I turned into my own driveway, and my stomach dropped in that very specific way. The way it drops when you already know, before anyone says a number, that whatever this costs, you don't have it. I sat there with the engine off, running numbers in my head that didn't actually exist. Checking a bank balance I'd already memorized, hoping it had changed. It hadn't. That feeling has a name, and it's more common than you'd guess. Right now, roughly 4 in 10 adults in this country couldn't cover a sudden $400 bill without borrowing, selling something, or going without. Not because they're careless, because nobody ever showed them how a cushion actually gets built. So I built one. 6 months of expenses, from a completely ordinary paycheck, without cutting out everything I loved, without a single white-knuckle Sunday night with a spreadsheet. And the way it actually worked breaks almost every rule of advice I'd already tried and quietly failed at. This isn't 10 tips. It's one thing I learned that changed how I think about money entirely. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Picture 2 people. Person 1 decides to save whatever's left at the end of the month. Person 2 never sees the money at all. It leaves the account the same day it arrives, before a single bill gets paid. Same income, same goal. Only one of them finishes. Here's why. Spending expands to fill whatever room it's given. If saving goes last, after rent and groceries and gas have already had first pick, saving loses. Every time. Not because person 1 is weak, because their system never reserved it a seat at the table. I was person 1 for years. I'd open my banking app on the 28th of the month, genuinely intending to move something into savings, and find $40 sitting there, already spoken for by something I couldn't quite remember buying. Not because I was reckless, because $40 sitting in an account that also pays for groceries and gas and everything else will always find a reason to be spent before it finds a reason to be saved. There's a second myth, the one about lattes, and it's become something of a punchline, for good reason. The math on coffee was never the actual problem. The problem is what happens when your whole plan runs on restriction. Willpower behaves less like an unlimited resource and more like a muscle that tires. Cut out everything you enjoy for a savings goal, and around week 3, one bad day collapses the whole thing into a single purchase that's supposed to feel like relief. Then comes the guilt. And the guilt is usually what kills the next attempt before it starts. So if restriction doesn't work, what does? Let's run a quick experiment, the one that actually rewired how I think about saving. Ask someone to take a pay cut today, and almost everyone says no. It feels like a loss, and losses hurt roughly twice as much as an equivalent gain feels good. That's not opinion, that's measured, repeatedly, in behavioral research. So a group of researchers in the early 2000s, led by economist Richard Thaler, tried something different. Instead of asking employees to save more of today's paycheck, they asked them to commit, in advance, to saving a slice of tomorrow's raise. Money they'd never held yet, and so never felt was theirs to lose. They called it Save More Tomorrow. Employees who joined saw their savings rate climb from around 3.5% of income to nearly 14% within a few years, almost entirely on autopilot. Nobody gritted their teeth. Nobody felt poorer. The money never passed through their hands as spendable cash to begin with. Watch what happens when you apply that to an emergency fund. My problem was never a lack of discipline, it was timing. I kept trying to save money after I'd already seen it land in checking, already mentally spent it, so I flipped it. Picture the paycheck landing, and before it's even fully settled, a slice of it peeling off on its own, never sitting in checking long enough to become grocery money or gas money in my head, moving straight into a separate account with a different name, a different bank, a different purpose entirely. Same paycheck, different destination, decided in advance instead of in the moment. Money that never touches checking gets filed in your brain under never had it, not gave it up. Small trick. Enormous difference. Here's the twist almost nobody mentions. That same wiring runs in reverse too. It's why lottery winners and people who get sudden windfalls tend to burn through that money faster than money they work steadily for. The brain files it as extra, not real, so it feels disposable. I started using that on purpose. The first year I tried this, my tax refund came in at just under $600. In previous years, that money had quietly become a new coat, a weekend trip, a nicer dinner than usual. Never one big obvious purchase, just a series of small ones that felt earned because it felt like bonus money. That year, it went straight into the fund the same day it landed, before it ever had the chance to feel like mine to spend on anything else. Tax refunds, small bonuses, surprise reimbursements, money I'd never budgeted around, went the same way from then on. Some months, that single habit outpaced weeks of careful budgeting. Now imagine staring at the full 6-month number on day one. For most people, that's not a goal, that's a wall. Here's a quick experiment worth trying yourself. A coffee shop loyalty card with 10 stamps. People fill it faster once they're sitting on stamp 8 than when they're staring down stamp 1. Marathon runners standing at the start line aren't thinking about mile 26. They're thinking about the next water station. Researchers call this the goal gradient effect. We push harder as the finish line feels closer, and we need it to feel reachable to start pushing it all. So I never set out to save 6 months. I set out to save $1,000, small enough to actually picture finishing, big enough to cover the exact kind of surprise that used to wreck me. Hitting that first mark made the whole idea real. Only then did I let the target grow. 1 month, then 3, then 6. Each one its own finish line instead of one distant, discouraging number. Try this yourself for a second. Picture the number 6 months of your own expenses adds up to. Now picture 1 month of it instead. Notice how differently those two numbers sit in your chest. Same math, same direction, completely different feeling, and that feeling is the entire reason one of them gets started and the other gets postponed indefinitely. Here's something that tripped me up early on, and it's worth naming because it trips up almost everyone. When people calculate 6 months of expenses, they usually add up everything they currently spend, including the vacation fund, the streaming subscriptions, the takeout. That number is real, but it's the wrong number to build an emergency fund around, and it's often the reason the target feels impossibly large. An emergency fund isn't meant to preserve your current lifestyle. It's meant to keep you housed, fed, insured, and functional if income stops. Rent or mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, minimum debt payments, transportation to get to work. That's the number that matters here. The bare, unglamorous cost of staying afloat, not the cost of life exactly as it looks today. For most people, that number is noticeably smaller than their full monthly spending, sometimes by a third or more. Which means 6 months of survival expenses is often a far more reachable target than 6 months of your actual spending. And confusing the two is one of the quieter reasons this goal feels so much bigger than it needs to. There's a myth hiding underneath all of this too. The idea that an emergency fund is all or nothing. That until you hit the full number, you don't really have one, so why check the account at all? I believed that for years. I'd compare my few $100s to the full goal, feel the gap as embarrassing instead of as progress, and stop looking. The truth is closer to the opposite. The jump from 0 to even a modest cushion does more to lower financial stress than almost any change after it. The last few months matter. The first few $100s matter more than people give them credit for. This matters even more if your income isn't the same every month. I have a cousin who drives for a rideshare app, and for years he told me an emergency fund just wasn't realistic for someone whose income swings by hundreds of dollars week to week. He wasn't wrong that a fixed dollar transfer would have broken constantly. A flat $50 withdrawal on a week he barely covered rent would have felt like a punishment, and eventually he'd have turned it off entirely. So instead of a flat number, he set his transfer as a percentage, a slice of whatever hit his account, automatically, the same day it landed. A slow week meant a few dollars moved. A good week meant more. The rhythm mattered more than the size, and because the percentage matched his reality instead of fighting it, it never felt worth turning off. 18 months later, he had just over 2 months of expenses saved, on an income that never once looked like a steady paycheck. Here's a number worth sitting with. Recent research puts the typical American's emergency fund around $500. Younger adults often have even less. Older adults tend to have more. That's not talent. That's decades of a habit compounding. And here's something worth naming. The 3 to 6 months rule itself isn't a law of physics. It came from planners working off a simple assumption that losing your income usually takes a few months to recover from. The right number depends on your job, your household, how predictable your expenses are. 6 isn't magic. It's a planning assumption wearing a rule's clothing. I mention that because plenty of people quietly give up before starting, simply because 6 months feels unreachable, when the real goal was never hit 6 months by a deadline. It's keep moving, with a system sturdy enough not to break the first time life gets hard. Now, I want to say something directly, because I know what some of you are thinking. This is easy to say when there's money left over. Some months there isn't. That's fair, and I won't pretend otherwise. Some months, the arithmetic genuinely doesn't allow it. If that's you right now, the goal isn't forcing a transfer that isn't there. It's building the automated system today, even at an amount that feels almost embarrassingly small, so the habit exists before the income does. $5 a paycheck isn't much money. It's a lot of practice. When a raise or a better month arrives, the structure is already built and ready to simply absorb more. Where the money actually lives matters too, for 2 reasons. The average traditional savings account pays under 0.5% a year. Competitive online savings accounts often pay several times that. Over the months it takes to build a real cushion, that gap adds up to real money, for doing nothing but choosing where idle cash sits. That's a general statement about how savings accounts work, not a recommendation of any specific bank. Rates move. But the lesson holds. Money in the wrong place is quietly costing you something every day it sits there. The second reason is almost entirely psychological. I kept the fund at a separate bank, not just a separate account. No debit card attached, no one-tap transfer sitting next to my spending money. That friction was deliberate. Thaler's later work with legal scholar Cass Sunstein calls this a nudge. Small friction changes behavior more reliably than willpower does. Think of it like a kitchen cabinet with a child lock on it. Nobody's willpower is being tested every time they walk past. The obstacle does the work the willpower used to have to do. I didn't trust future me, at 10 at night after a hard day, to leave that money alone if it sat 1 click away. So I built a speed bump. It worked exactly as intended, more than once. A friend of mine, a nurse, spent nearly 2 years trying to build a cushion on pure determination, a recurring reminder to move money on the 15th. Some months she did. Most months something came first. A car payment, a birthday, a slightly expensive grocery week. The month she finally automated the transfer to hit before she ever saw her paycheck was the first month in 2 years it actually happened. Within a year, she'd gone from a few $100s to nearly 3 months of expenses. Not because she suddenly earned more, because she stopped asking willpower to do a job automation was simply better at. There's a quieter myth worth naming here too. The idea that a credit card is basically an emergency fund. It looks similar on paper. In practice, it's a different tool wearing the same costume. A credit card doesn't prevent an emergency, it postpones it, with a price tag attached. Picture 2 people again, both hit with the exact same emergency, a job loss that lasts 3 months. Person 1 has a credit card and nothing else. Every month without income, the balance grows, and by the time a new paycheck arrives, a chunk of it is already spoken for by interest that accumulated while they had no way to fight back. Person 2 has a fund instead. The 3 months hurt, no question. But nothing compounds against them while they're down. They come out the other side even. Same emergency, very different landing. If the emergency is your income itself, a layoff, fewer hours, an injury, a credit card doesn't help. It compounds the problem, because now there's a balance growing at the exact moment your ability to pay it down has taken a hit. One is a buffer. The other is a loan you haven't taken out yet. Confusing them feels fine for years, right up until the 1 month it doesn't. Somewhere in the middle of building this, something quieter shifted too. I stopped thinking of myself as someone trying to save money and started thinking of myself as someone who has savings. I remember the exact moment I noticed it. A coworker was venting about a surprise vet bill, dreading how she'd cover it, and I heard myself say, "Oh, that's what the fund is for." Not as advice, just as a fact about my own life, the same way you'd mention where you keep your spare key. Researchers who study habits have found behavior sticks far better once it becomes part of how someone sees themselves rather than a task they're grinding through. A person trying to save can quit on a bad day. A person who already has a fund, however small, isn't quitting on anything. They're protecting something that already exists. And here's something small that mattered more than I expected. Every time I crossed one of those milestones, the first 1,000, the first full month, the first 3, I actually looked at the number, not just glanced, sat with it for a minute, the way you'd pause on a good photo instead of scrolling past it. Small as that sounds, noticing progress is what keeps a goal gradient effect working in your favor instead of fizzling out halfway. A finish line only pulls you forward if you actually let yourself feel how much closer you've gotten. Here's the part I didn't understand back then. Remember that driveway? The interesting part is that the car was never really the problem. A few $100s, fixed in an afternoon, that part was small. What made it feel like the floor dropping out was everything it threatened to knock over next. The bill I'd have to skip to cover it, the account I'd have to overdraw, the week I'd spend distracted by a problem that, on paper, wasn't even that large. The fear was never about the number, it was about what the number could set off. And here's the real reason any of this matters. More than the account, more than the transfer schedule. Researchers who study financial stress have found that when people are financially stretched, the mental bandwidth left over for every other decision shrinks. Not because stretched people are less capable, because low-grade financial anxiety acts like a constant tax on attention. Picture someone sitting in a meeting at work, nodding along, while some quiet corner of their mind is still doing arithmetic about whether Thursday's paycheck clears before Wednesday's rent payment goes through. They're present, they're trying, but part of their processing power never actually left the math. It shows up as worse decisions at work, worse sleep, shorter patience with people you love, because part of your mind is always quietly running the math in the background. And those distracted decisions often cost more money, deepening the very scarcity that caused them. A loop that feeds itself. An emergency fund breaks that loop. Not because 6 months of expenses solves every problem money can throw at you. It doesn't. It breaks the loop because it removes the background hum of dread. The math stops running on repeat. That's the real return on an emergency fund, and it's the part that never makes it into a spreadsheet. I think about that driveway a lot, not because the repair was dramatic, a few $100s fixed in an afternoon. I think about the person doing panicked mental math in that seat versus who I became a couple of years later, the next time something broke without warning. Same kind of surprise, a different person receiving it. That second time, I felt almost nothing. No spike of dread, just an errand. I transferred the money, made the appointment, went on with my day. That flatness, that non-event, is one of the best financial feelings there is. And nobody talks about it, because nothing happened doesn't make a very good story. But it's the entire point. The goal of an emergency fund was never to make you rich. It was to make ordinary problems stay ordinary. A cracked windshield, a broken furnace, a slow month at work, none of that should be the moment your entire financial life comes apart. Most people don't lose their financial footing because of one catastrophic mistake. They lose it because an ordinary problem arrived at a moment with no buffer underneath it, and one thing quietly knocked over the next. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about understanding money in a way that actually works in real life, not just on a whiteboard. That's exactly what this channel is all about. Every week, I break down personal finance, investing, budgeting, and wealth building into simple, practical lessons anyone can use. If that sounds like something you'd find valuable, consider subscribing. I'd love to have you here, because the next time your version of that driveway happens, and at some point it does, for all of us, the goal was never to avoid the surprise. It's to make sure the surprise is the only thing that happens.